G'day, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us once again for another episode of the Big Bad Brad Show MMA edition. My name is Brad Williams, and every single week-ish, we aim to provide you with a fan's eye view of the sport of mixed martial arts from way out the back in the cheap seats. I do say week-ish because we did take a week off last week, mainly because there wasn't really anything worth talking about, and I just didn't want to do another show talking about Conor and Floyd. So, yeah, had a little holiday, but we are back. I do appreciate everyone that got in touch to see what was going on last week, and I love that you guys are sticking with the show. You can find us at facebook.com/BigBadBradMMA. You can find us on Twitter at BigBadBradMMA, and we are now on YouTube. Just search Big Bad Brad Show MMA, and you'll be able to find us on YouTube. No dramas at all. Stacks to get through this week, and we're going to jump straight into it with some pretty sad news with the announcement of James Tahuna's retirement. For people that don't know, James Tahuna was just an absolutely sensational representative of Aussie MMA and New Zealand MMA. He's Kiwi-born, lives and trains out of Sydney, and always said that he was proud to represent both Australia and New Zealand, and we were proud to have him. Just an absolute warrior, and he announced this week that he was going to be hanging up the gloves. He had a 10-fight UFC career. He went 5-5 in the UFC, 16-9 overall, but just fought with a rare toughness that you can't help but respect. I always loved watching James Tahuna fight. I was in Sydney when he made his UFC debut against Igor Pokrayadze at UFC 110 back in 2010, and when he scored the TKO, the crowd reaction was just insane. He was the first of the local boys on the card the first time the UFC came to Australia. So everyone was just chomping at the bit to see him get in there and have a go and to pull off the win over a tough opponent like Pokrayadze. The place just exploded. As I say, he went 5-5 in the UFC, but his losses were to the best of the best. Alexander Gustafsson, I've talked about it on the show before, probably the best light heavyweight never to have been world champion yet. Glover Teixeira, top contender. Shogun Rua, former light heavyweight champion. Nate Marquardt, former middleweight title challenger. These guys are the cream of the crop. Absolutely no shame in losing to these guys. And gave us some fantastic moments in the UFC. James Tahuna's fight with Joey Beltran, just two blokes planting their feet, having a go. And everyone, of course, most memorably remembers his Men in Black entrance, where him and his team dressed up as the guys from Men in Black, and they danced their way to the octagon for his fight with Ryan Jimmo in London back in 2013. And in that fight, Jimmo absolutely cracked James Tahuna with a head kick. And Tahuna managed to get his bearings and actually come back and win the fight. And again, just showed that legendary toughness. And it's sad to see James Tahuna go, but I said after his fight with Steve Bosse in Brizzy when he was knocked out in the first round, if he did decide to retire, he has absolutely nothing to be ashamed about. James Tahuna should be so tremendously proud of everything that he accomplished in the UFC and in mixed martial arts in general. And, from myself, for what it's worth, James Tahuna, congratulations, mate, and thanks for everything that you did for Australian MMA. You're an absolute legend. And for anyone that's going to be training under James Tahuna in the future, you're in for a treat because, he's been and done it all. Thank you so much to James Tahuna. Okay, so we move on now to some fight announcements over the last couple of weeks. And there have been some absolute doozies, the biggest of which was just a couple of days ago. It was announced that Stipe Miocic would be defending his newly crowned UFC Heavyweight Championship of the World against Alistair Overeem. We knew that fight was going to happen prior to Stipe Miocic's fight with Verdum, which we will talk about in just a few minutes. Now we know where and when. It's going to be UFC 203 in Miocic's hometown of Cleveland, Ohio. It's happening Sunday, the 11th of September, Australian time. Huge heavyweight fight. Should be an absolute clanger. You got the classic striking style of Overeem versus the athleticism of Miocic. Can't wait. Just two big, strong dudes having a go. That's going to be awesome. Also, we found out in recent days or weeks, I really can't remember, they all blend together, there's so much to get through, that Chris Weidman was injured and would be withdrawing from his planned UFC middleweight title fight against champion Luke Rockhold. Who should step in to take his place? None other than Michael the Count Bisping. It's been an announcement that surprised some people, but I think it's really just so great to see Michael Bisping, after 10 years in the UFC, finally get an opportunity to fight for a world title. And I go back and forth on Bisping. Some days I think he's the biggest dickhead in the world, and other days I think he's bloody hilarious and great for the sport. But regardless of where I sit on either of those days, I have nothing but respect for Michael Bisping. And I think it's fantastic that he's getting a crack at the belt. It is on short notice, and of course Bisping has already suffered a submission loss to Luke Rockhold. That happened in Sydney back in 2014. But, you know, if the stars align and if if you believe in fairy tales, then Michael Bisping walking away with the middleweight championship of the world would definitely be one of those dream come true moments. But he's got a huge task ahead of him in Luke Rockhold. Rockhold has looked unreal in recent years, absolutely demolished Chris Weidman. I was actually really surprised when they announced that Weidman was going to get an immediate rematch. I think, it seems to be the done thing these days, that if you lose your belt, you immediately get an opportunity to regain it. But I just didn't really think, and no disrespect to Chris Weidman, he's a tremendous athlete, but it didn't seem like one of those fights where you'd think, yeah, fair enough. If Holly Holm wasn't going to get an immediate rematch with Miesha Tate, then Weidman was a bit of a head scratcher. But I'm sure he'll be straight back in the mix as soon as he's fit. Will he fight Bisping or will he fight Rockhold? We'll know after UFC 199. Also some news for UFC 199, and it absolutely broke my heart. BJ Penn out of UFC 199. BJ, I've said it before, is my absolute favourite fighter of all time, and I was so excited to see him come out of retirement and take on Dennis Siva, and then that fell through, and it was announced he was going to be facing Cole Miller, and he's now been suspended by ASADA for using an intravenous drip out of competition, which is now illegal year-round. BJ said that he was unaware that was the case, but he has been suspended as a result. No word yet on when he'll be back or how long he'll be suspended for, but we will keep you posted. And Cole Miller now has a new opponent in Alex Caceres, Bruce Leroy, stepping up on short notice. So the fight stays on the card. And BJ, get back in there soon, mate, because I bloody cannot wait much longer. Also, one that seemed to come out of absolutely nowhere was the announcement that Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson would be defending his UFC Flyweight Championship against Wilson Hayes at UFC 201, which is going down on July 31st, Australian time. This just bloody popped up out of nowhere. There were no rumblings about it, no hint that it might be happening. All of the attention seemed to be focused on Mighty Mouse fighting the winner of The Ultimate Fighter Season 24 in December, and then, he's just going to fight Wilson Hayes in the meantime. But, you got to fight, you got to make money, and if Wilson Hayes is prepared to have a go, why not? He's the 8th ranked contender. He has won 3 of his last 4. His last fight was a win over someone I think is a tremendous prospect in Dustin Ortiz. That fight was back in January. So, is Wilson Hayes going to win? Probably not. But it's a fight. Anything can happen. Can you imagine if he did? And it'd flip the whole division on its head. And if fighters want to fight and stay busy, I would much prefer that than people sitting out for years and years at a time just waiting for a title fight. So that fight, as I say, it's going down UFC 201. Also, the rumour mill went into overdrive with the hint from Mickey Gall that his fight with CM Punk could potentially be happening in late summer in the States, which would be late winter here, so you're looking August. It's one of those things where people have started to wonder whether it's actually going to happen. It was a little bit of a publicity stunt when the UFC signed former WWE superstar CM Punk, but I just don't understand the hate for Punk. He's been treating this whole journey that he's on with nothing but respect for the guys that came before him. He's a huge UFC fan. He's been a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner for years. Look, there's no denying the fact that he's in the UFC because there's a boatload of money to be made for both himself and for the Ultimate Fighting Championship. There's no way of getting around that. But it's not like he's coming straight in to a title fight or straight into a top contender fight. He's taken on Mickey Gall, who's 2-0. He came up through Dana White looking for a fight, the reality show. He was very young in his career. He had his UFC debut where he finished a guy named Michael Jackson, which is a bit funny, in the first round, knowing that if he won that fight, he would be the first opponent for CM Punk. Punk is 0-0. He's making his MMA debut, full stop. He hasn't even had an amateur fight. Mickey Gall was 2-0 as an amateur, 2-0 as a professional. Let's just see what Punk can do. Don't write the bloke off. He might get in there and be a superstar. He might get in there and get smashed. But we're going to find out from the looks of things, sooner rather than later. So stay tuned for any news that might break in regards to CM Punk and if/when he eventually makes his UFC debut. Okay, so while we're away, UFC 198 went down in Brazil. Fantastic night of fights. Shogun Rua picked up a very close decision victory over Corey Anderson. Damian Maia firmly cemented his place as a welterweight contender over Matt Brown. And of course, finally, the long-awaited debut of Chris Cyborg. The crowd in Brazil was red hot, and it was completely as advertised. Cyborg came out and smashed Leslie Smith in 81 seconds, scoring the TKO. Leslie Smith was really upset with the stoppage. She felt that it was a little bit early, and nothing but respect for Leslie Smith, because she came in there ready to fight, and she was furious with what she felt was an early stoppage. But I think from a fan's perspective, it was probably just, you would have just been delaying the inevitable by letting the fight go on. Cyborg was in complete control and just looked like the absolute monster that we all know and love. And then straight away, everything went into overdrive as far as a potential fight between Cyborg and Ronda. But it's looking more and more like Ronda might never come back. That's just a reality that I think we might have to face moving forward. I think it would be a real shame if Cyborg and Ronda never actually happened. Cyborg has been the much more vocal of the two about this fight actually taking place. Ronda has been radio silent as far as Cyborg goes, but there's no denying that fight would be huge, huge money for all involved, and I would go anywhere in the world to watch that fight. So congratulations to Cyborg on a hugely successful UFC debut. And also at UFC 198, as I mentioned before, the crowning of a new heavyweight champion of the world. Stipe Miocic scored a one-punch knockout over Fabricio Verdum to become the top dog in the UFC's heavyweight division. I was watching that fight with my brother, and I said when Verdum was walking to the cage, he's hugging people, he's having a great time, he's waving, he's pulling his duck face, and I said to my brother, man, this guy looks like he's thinking about everything but a fight. He really was, and I know it would be easy to be overwhelmed when you're in front of 45,000 of your home country fans and they're all going bloody berserk, but you're on your way to a fight, man, and Miocic is a tough, tough individual. And Verdum came out, everything was getting settled in, and then Miocic went bang and landed a right hand, and Verdum, very strangely, just chased him with his hands down. And so Miocic went, okay, bang, second one, out like a light. And just like that, we had a new UFC heavyweight champion. We know now that Stipe Miocic's first title defense will be against Alistair Overeem at UFC 203. So what does that mean for Verdum? Your friend and mine, the Super Samoan Mark Hunt, was straight onto it and called for a rematch with Verdum. I think that makes a lot of sense. Junior Dos Santos is recovering from shoulder surgery. Travis Brown and Cain Velasquez will fight at UFC 200, so we may see the winner of that take on Mark Hunt. I can't see Mark Hunt not being on the November card in Australia. Again, word this week, it will be in either Melbourne or Sydney in November. We don't have an exact date or an exact venue, but I can't see that card going ahead without Mark Hunt. So, hopefully we'll find out sooner rather than later who his opponent would be, but if it was Verdum, I wouldn't be surprised. We will keep you posted with anything that might break in the matter of UFC's return to Sydney as soon as it becomes available. Also this week, and it seems like we can't go a week without discussing it, Conor McGregor had a meeting with the UFC, Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta, that apparently went very well. They then had a meeting with Nate Diaz that didn't go so well. Money appears to be the hold-up in regards to getting a rematch set between Conor and Nate. I think at this stage it would just be really bloody silly if this fight didn't happen. I know when it was announced for UFC 200 I wasn't that keen on it, but it's been talked about for so long now that it feels like it almost has to happen before we can all go on with our lives. So, if they can come to terms, and I completely agree with Nate Diaz. I think he is as much a reason for the success of the first fight as Conor McGregor, and I think he would be as much a part of the success of the second fight, should it happen, as Conor is, and he should be compensated for that. So, UFC, give Nate what he deserves, give him what he wants, let's make this fight happen, and then we can all go on with our lives. So we move on now to the next time we will see the UFC inside the octagon, and it will be this coming Monday, May the 30th, Australian time, UFC Fight Night, Almeida versus Garbrandt. The main event is undefeated bantamweight prospects Thomas Almeida and Cody Garbrandt. We'll get to that in just a second, but this really is a sensational card, especially for a free fight night. We are in for a real treat. On the UFC Fight Pass prelims, undefeated bantamweight contender, Aljamain Sterling, is going to be taking on Brian Caraway. Sterling's 13-0. He's a Serra Longo prospect, training in New York with Matt Serra and Ray Longo, and just looks every bit a superstar. I love watching Aljamain Sterling, and I think he really is someone that deserves maybe a little bit better than he's been getting from the UFC. But this is a huge spotlight. A lot of people have been critical of putting this fight on Fight Pass, but you've got to understand that the UFC is trying to promote Fight Pass and encourage people to sign up. If you haven't already, what are you doing? It's amazing. It's $10 a month. I spent 13 hours last week watching fights. Last Sunday, in one day, and I have no regrets. Get Fight Pass. It's unreal. And this is a huge platform. This fight has got a lot of promotion. It's been everywhere. It's been featured in the build-up to the card, and it's a great spotlight for both Aljamain Sterling and for Brian Caraway. Caraway's won 3 of his last 4. His only loss was to Rafael Assunção, who is a top contender in the bantamweight division. So this is a great fight and a really great platform for both guys. I wish both fellas the best of luck. Also on this card, absolute powerhouse Abel Trujillo is going to be taking on UFC newcomer Jordan Rinaldi, who replaces Carlos Diego Ferreira, who was flagged for a potential ASADA anti-doping violation. Just for something different. Seems like it happens every second day. So, it's a big ask for Rinaldi to take on Abel Trujillo in his UFC debut. But there's just something about these guys on debut. They always seem to overachieve. It seems more often than not, especially in the last few years, guys come in making their promotional debut as a last-minute replacement and pull off the upset. And it would be an upset. Abel Trujillo is legit. And scary, scary power. His fight with Jamie Varner is one of the most fun fights I've ever seen. If you haven't seen it, check it out. So that will feature on the card. Also, top women's bantamweight contenders in Jessica Ai and Sarah McMahon. Both girls coming off losses. Jessica Ai to Juliana Pena back in October, and Sarah McMahon to Amanda Nunes in August of last year. Of course, Amanda Nunes, the next challenger for the Bantamweight Championship. So this is a very important fight for both girls, both highly skilled, and should be a really, really fun fight. Also on the card, the evergreen Josh Berkman taking on Paul Felder, Lawrence Larkin taking on Jorge Masvidal. Both of those fights could genuinely be fight of the night contenders. We then moved to Tarek Saffiedine taking on Rick Story. Story has been out for over 18 months. He hasn't fought since October of 2014. Where he did pick up an upset victory over Gunnar Nelson. It really halted the momentum of Gunnar and showed that Rick Story is still legit and still very, very tough out for anyone in the UFC welterweight division. Of course, Tarek Saffiedine is a former Strikeforce welterweight champion, and he's won 6 of his last 7 fights. His only loss was to Rory McDonald, who has smashed everyone not named Robbie Lawler. So, this is a really, really important fight. Both guys looking to keep the good times rolling in the welterweight division and would really be a tough fight for anyone up that pointy end. So definitely worth keeping an eye on. We move now to the co-main event and a very, very interesting fight in Renan Barão making his UFC featherweight debut taking on Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens is coming off a loss to Max Holloway, who is elite in the UFC featherweight division, a genuine top contender. But he's been around forever, Jeremy Stephens. He's got wins over Cole Miller, over Darren Elkins. Who could forget his highlight reel knockout of current UFC lightweight champion Rafael dos Anjos back in 2008. It was an uppercut that would almost knock him into the 10th row. It was incredible. And Jeremy Stephens is so tough and fights with such a fan-friendly style. He's so fun to watch fight, and a great spotlight for him taking on one of the scariest fighters in the UFC in Renan Barão. Barão, of course, the former UFC bantamweight champion, was on a 32-fight unbeaten streak, which is just ridiculous, before it was halted by TJ Dillashaw, who knocked him out to become the bantamweight champion of the world. Barão then had a really tough fight with Mitch Gagnon, which he won by decision, and challenged Dillashaw for his, in an attempt to regain the championship, and was knocked out again. That was the last time he fought. It was back in July of last year, and that's a big thing to overcome. It has prompted his move to featherweight, but I would be surprised if he stays there. I think with Dominic Cruz being the champion now, having defeated Dillashaw in the interim, I That was the fight that everyone was talking about for a long time. As soon as Dominic Cruz got fit, throw him in there with Renan Barão. I'd still love to see that fight. And I think if Barão is interested in going back to bantamweight, it's basically a clean slate for him now. Going back with Dillashaw still being champion, it's a bit of a non-issue. When the current champion's already beaten you twice, it makes your road to another title shot much, much steeper. But, with Cruz being the champion, potentially Uriah Faber being champion, who Barão already has 2 wins over. I would be surprised if he didn't go back to bantamweight. People think I'm crazy for thinking that Uriah Faber can beat Dominic Cruz. I'm telling you right now, man, Faber is a genuine chance in that fight at UFC 199. Will he beat him? I don't know. I can't say for sure. But I think if there was ever a time that Uriah Faber was going to become UFC bantamweight champion of the world, it's June 5th. So, call me crazy. But if it happens, I really won't be surprised. But back to the co-main event of this weekend. It's really going to depend which Renan Barão shows up. Will we see the beast that was smashing everyone on his way to becoming bantamweight champion? Or are we going to see a Renan Barão who's down on confidence? It's a really interesting thing to keep an eye out for. And if Barão shows up feeling anything but himself, we could see a huge upset from Jeremy Stephens, because Jeremy Stephens is tough as nails, he's aggressive, he's powerful, and he's been there for a million years. He's been and done it all. So, and if both guys come ready to bang, this could really be something special. So, the co-main event, we could very well be in for a treat as fight fans. And speaking of being in for a treat, we move to the main event in Thomas Almeida versus Cody Garbrandt. Of course, Cody Garbrandt, Team Alpha Male product. That's weird to say, isn't it? You can't really have a team of alpha males. Every time I hear that, I think of the movie Airheads with Adam Sandler and Steve Buscemi and Brendan Fraser. They're a band called the Lone Rangers. And a radio DJ says to him, there's 3 of you. You're not exactly lone. You can't be 3 Lone Rangers. And I always think of that with Team Alpha Male. An alpha male is your top dog. So you can't, by definition, you can't have a team of alpha males. If everyone's a top dog, then you're all level. So then, by definition, no one's a top dog. Anyway, I'm probably overthinking it. The last thing I want to do is piss off a team of elite MMA fighters, so we will move on. But Garbrandt is 8-0. Thomas Almeida, 21-0. Someone's O has got to go. And whoever comes out victorious in this fight really puts themselves into the conversation as far as bantamweight contendership. Thomas Almeida has looked unstoppable since arriving in the UFC, and some of the best highlight reel knockouts you'll ever see. His flying knee of Brad Pickett, who, one of the knocks on Almeida has been, who's he actually beat? Mate, Brad Pickett is legit. He was a top contender at bantamweight, still tough as nails, and Almeida had to overcome some adversity in that fight. Brad Pickett dropped him, and he came back, rallied, and knocked him out with a picture-perfect flying knee. Thomas Almeida last fought in July of last year, a first-round knockout of Anthony Burchak, and this is just a great spotlight for a couple of young guys who are trying to put themselves on the map. And I think we're the beneficiaries of what is going to be, hopefully, fingers crossed, if it lives up to what it looks like on paper, a sensational fight night. If you want to check it out, it's coming up this Monday, and the UFC, you are absolutely killing me with these Monday fight nights. You know how bloody hard it is to go to work when I know I could just stay home and watch the fights? I don't want to go to work on the best of days. I don't hate my job, and I work with a nice bunch of people, but if I had to choose between that and staying home to watch the Blues, it wouldn't even be a conversation worth having. I would run home from work, and I don't run anywhere. But if you want to check it out, it's happening Monday, the 30th of May. Fight Pass prelims kick off at 8 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. The prelim card kicks off on Fox Sports at 9 a.m. and the main card also on Fox Sports, free of charge, at 11 a.m. Monday morning, Australian Eastern Standard Time. So with that, it brings us to the end of another episode of the Big Bad Brad Show MMA. Once again, you can find us at facebook.com/Big Bad Brad MMA. You can find us on Twitter at Big Bad Brad MMA, and you can find us on YouTube. Just search Big Bad Brad Show MMA, and you'll be able to find us. No dramas at all. Thank you so much for checking out the show. Enjoy the fights on Monday, and I will catch you next time.